When light meets wood and faith meets mystery, sometimes heaven leaves a trace too perfect to explain. The story begins, not in a cathedral, but in a simple photograph, and later, in a staircase that seems to defy every known law of gravity. Two moments separated by centuries, yet bound by the same quiet figure, Saint Joseph, the carpenter who never speaks, and yet whose silence continues to echo through miracles no one can quite dismiss. The story that reignited the world's fascination with Saint Joseph began with a photograph found among a group of sisters, a modest image taken during a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. The women had visited Nazareth, and while there, a man appeared among them, gentle, serene, and dressed in garments of an age long past. When the photograph was shown later, someone whispered that it was him, the foster father of Jesus, standing beside Mother Alicia, who would die soon after the image was taken. It all felt too symbolic to be coincidence, too intimate to be mere trick of light, and too holy to be explained away. Mother Alicia herself had been known for her devotion to Saint Joseph. She spoke of him not as a distant figure of the past, but as a living protector, the quiet intercessor, who still labors unseen in the shadows of human suffering before her death, which came, strikingly, in the very year of Saint Joseph. She shared that photograph with a close friend, saying only that it was a gift of his presence. When the daughters of the Fiat congregation later released their statement, they tried to anchor the story in reason. They said that the man was merely a caretaker from the Nazareth workshop, that the photograph had been misinterpreted, that no miracle had occurred. But the faithful were not convinced. For some, the image was not about proof, but about perception. For faith often begins where evidence ends. Many looked at the man's calm expression, his old-fashioned hands folded at his chest, and felt something stir, an ancient familiarity, as if the guardian of the Holy Family had stepped into the frame for a moment before retreating again into eternity. It wasn't the first time Saint Joseph had been tied to impossible craftsmanship. Long before cameras existed, another story had traveled across the Atlantic and into legend. The story of the miraculous staircase of Santa Fe. In the year 1872, the Sisters of Loreto had built a small chapel in New Mexico, a masterpiece of devotion and design. Except for one fatal flaw, there was no staircase to reach the choir loft. The architect said it couldn't be done. The space was too narrow, the walls too delicate, the structure too confined. For days the sisters prayed, their candles burning low at the altar of Saint Joseph, the patron of carpenters. They prayed a novena, 9 days of desperate faith, and on the final day, a stranger appeared at the chapel door. He carried nothing but a few simple tools and asked for one thing: solitude. The sisters granted it. He shut the doors, and from within came the steady rhythm of hammer on wood, the whisper of shavings falling to the floor. Days later, when the chapel was opened again, a staircase stood where none should have been, a double spiral, perfectly balanced, built without a single nail or central support. It seemed to float in the air like a prayer turned solid. And just as quietly as he came, the carpenter vanished. No one knew his name. No one ever found him. Some said it was an angel. Others said it was Saint Joseph himself, come once more to finish the work. No one else could begin. To this day, the staircase still stands, defying the weight of time and gravity. The wood cannot be traced to any known species, its resilience unmatched. The curve rises in 2 perfect circles, 33 steps, the age of Christ at his death, every inch of it, an echo of divine geometry, the harmony of heaven translated into timber. And perhaps that is what ties the photograph in Nazareth and the staircase in Santa Fe together. 2 glimpses of an invisible craftsman who never sought glory, only completion. The mystery of Saint Joseph is that his miracles rarely announce themselves. They happen quietly, in corners, in workshops, in hearts that refuse to give up hope. And maybe that is the real miracle, that in a world desperate for spectacle, faith still blooms in silence. In both stories, the staircase that rose from nothing, and the photograph that seemed to capture a man who should not have been there. There lies a deeper language, one spoken not with words, but with presence. Saint Joseph has always been the saint of quiet miracles, the protector who builds, repairs, and disappears before anyone notices that he was there at all. His is the holiness of shadows, the sanctity that works without recognition, the faith that manifests not through thunder or prophecy, but through the silent perfection of a finished task. When the sisters of Loreto gazed upon their new staircase, they saw not only a structure of wood, but a metaphor for faith itself, every step rising higher without visible support, as if lifted by something unseen, just as their prayers had been. The wood spiraled upward, like a ladder between heaven and earth, an unspoken reminder that God answers even when the world insists there is no way forward. And when the photograph of the man in Nazareth began to circulate, it evoked the same quiet awe. His figure, humble, serene, ordinary, stood as an image of what faith truly looks like when it becomes flesh. Some theologians have long said that Saint Joseph's greatest miracle was not carpentry, but trust. He obeyed divine messages that came only in dreams. He protected the Son of God through sleepless nights and unmarked roads, and never once asked to be remembered. Yet it seems heaven remembers him in its own way, through inexplicable moments that bear his fingerprints. A piece of wood that shouldn't stand, a face that shouldn't appear, a timing that feels too precise to be coincidence. Both miracles, if they are indeed miracles, share one sacred rhythm. They begin in despair, in the moment when reason has reached its limit, and end in silence, where reason bows before mystery. Perhaps that is why they continue to move people centuries apart, because we recognize in them our own search for something that logic cannot quite grasp. For those who have prayed to Saint Joseph in times of need, the unemployed worker, the father uncertain how to protect his family, the soul searching for stability in chaos, these stories are not just legends. They are reminders that heaven still builds quietly through human hands, and that some of God's most enduring works are signed with anonymity. Mother Alicia's death, in the year of Saint Joseph, feels like more than coincidence too, as if her final act was to hand the world a small sign, a photograph that could only be understood through faith alone, a visual parable of his promise to remain close to those who labor, to those who trust without seeing. And yet, for all our investigation and debate, one truth remains unchanged. Every time humanity doubts the reality of the divine, something small and strange happens. A staircase that floats, a photo that glows, a moment that refuses to fit within the boundaries of explanation. In the quiet of these mysteries, we may glimpse the carpenter still at work, shaping wood, shaping souls, shaping the unseen foundations of faith. The silence of Saint Joseph is not emptiness. It is fullness restrained, like the pause between two notes, that makes the melody complete. When Scripture speaks of him, it does not record a single word he ever uttered, not one speech, not one defense, not even a question. And yet, through that silence, the entire mystery of divine fatherhood unfolds. He was the guardian of the Word, and he guarded him not with sermons or proclamations, but with the quiet authority of love that acts without asking for recognition. It is said that God chose Joseph because he needed a man strong enough to be silent, strong enough to protect without control, to lead without pride, to believe without proof. He was a man who listened more than he spoke, and because of that, heaven could speak through him. In a world that now values noise more than truth, his example feels almost supernatural. Saint Joseph reminds us that holiness is not always found in preaching or in grandeur, but in the steady hand that builds a home, the patient heart that endures uncertainty, the man or woman who works in obscurity yet holds the world together through faith unseen. Perhaps that is why his presence continues to be felt across centuries, wherever something fragile needs protecting, wherever a worker struggles with exhaustion, wherever a father worries about his children's future, wherever a believer prays in secret for a sign. The spirit of Saint Joseph moves quietly, like a breath behind the walls of life. When the sisters prayed in Santa Fe, it was not just for a staircase, it was for direction and structure, something that would lift them toward the divine. When the photograph appeared decades later, it was not just a mystery caught on film, it was a reminder that the saints still walk among the living, that the invisible world still intersects our own at unexpected hours, and in both stories, the same message whispers through time, that the sacred is often disguised as the ordinary. The divine carpenter still builds within human stories, not only chapels and staircases, but entire lives. His silence teaches that faith does not always need to be spoken to be true, that protection can exist without recognition, and that love, when it is real, leaves behind no sound, only evidence too beautiful to explain. And so, perhaps the image of Saint Joseph captured among the sisters was never meant to be proof of an apparition, but an invitation, a reminder that holiness may still stand beside us unnoticed, that heaven sometimes dresses in plain clothes and appears only long enough to finish the work that faith began. And when that work is done, it disappears quietly, leaving behind not absence, but the lingering scent of trust, of wood freshly cut, of divine craftsmanship that continues in every act of care. Because wherever there is creation born of silence, protection born of humility, or work done with love, there Saint Joseph still is, invisible, patient, and endlessly near. The photograph and the staircase both belong to the language of symbols, a divine dialect that does not speak to the intellect first, but to the soul. Both carry within them a single luminous truth, that the road to heaven is built quietly, one step at a time. In wood and in faith, both appear simple, yet their mystery deepens the more one looks. The staircase, winding upward without visible support, is the image of a soul ascending toward God, guided not by reason but by trust. Every step a prayer, every curve a surrender. It rises in a perfect spiral, like the hidden motion of grace itself, unseen yet unbreakable, lifting the human spirit toward light. The photograph, on the other hand, is not an object of proof, but a mirror. When the faithful gaze upon that image and ask, "Is this truly Saint Joseph?" the question itself becomes sacred, for faith is not born in certainty, but in wonder. The picture shows a man who might be divine, or might simply be kind, yet those who look closely feel something stir inside them. The quiet awareness that heaven can inhabit the ordinary, that sanctity can dwell in any face at any moment. These two events, separated by centuries, continents, and technology, speak of the same encounter between humanity and mystery. The carpenter who shaped wood in Nazareth still shapes hearts in silence. The same hands that built a home for the Savior seem to return whenever something must be repaired. A chapel, a staircase, a fragment of faith cracked by doubt. In mystic tradition, wood has always carried a sacred meaning. It is the material of the cross, the bridge between suffering and salvation. Saint Joseph, as the worker of wood, becomes not only a craftsman, but a restorer of the covenant between matter and spirit. He reminds us that holiness is not abstract. It can be touched, carved, built with human hands and sweat. That is perhaps the deepest beauty of his miracles. They do not tear open the heavens, they rise from the dust. They do not terrify, they console. Their wonder lies in how the divine hides within the laws of the natural world, until those very laws begin to bend gently toward faith. The staircase, then, becomes not only an architectural marvel, but a sermon in timber. Its impossible structure tells us that what seems unsupported is in truth held by grace, that the higher we climb, the less we see the foundation, until we realize that the foundation has been love all along. And the photograph, whether it captured a saint or a stranger, becomes a parable for every believer who has ever asked for a sign. Sometimes God answers not with thunder, but with a face among friends, a moment of stillness that says, "I am here." Saint Joseph Epps' presence in these mysteries is not the presence of spectacle, but of nearness. The same nearness that kept the Christ child safe on cold nights. The same nearness that comforts the worker in fatigue, the family in uncertainty, the faithful in silence. In the end, what matters is not the proof of the miracle, but the invitation it carries to trust that the unseen is at work, that every act of faith builds another invisible step toward eternity. And perhaps, if one listens closely enough in the stillness of prayer, one might even hear it, the faint sound of a carpenter sip's hammer echoing somewhere between heaven and earth. As the master builder continues his work in secret, it is no coincidence that these signs, the photograph, the staircase, the quiet stories that refuse to fade, are resurfacing in our own time, an age in which noise has replaced prayer and images are consumed rather than contemplated. Saint Joseph returns not to astonish, but to remind the world of something we have forgotten, that holiness was never about spectacle, but about faithfulness. In the unseen, the modern heart craves proof, craves evidence, craves a miracle. It scrolls endlessly, searching for wonder, yet when wonder stands quietly before it, clothed in simplicity, it is almost invisible. Perhaps that is why heaven still chooses Joseph to speak for it, because he never speaks at all. His silence is not emptiness, but invitation. It invites us to slow down, to listen, to rediscover the sacred dignity of work, family, and trust in divine providence. In a world that builds faster than it believes, his return through these signs feels like a gentle rebuke and a tender mercy. He comes as he always has, unnoticed, disguised as a craftsman, hidden in the fabric of daily life. When faith collapses under the weight of cynicism, he rebuilds it beam by beam. When love grows fragile, he repairs it with the same care he once gave to the cradle of the Christ child. The year of Saint Joseph, declared not long ago, was more than a commemoration. It was a divine whisper for a restless generation, a call to return to the workshop of the soul, to rediscover that prayer is not always said on knees, but sometimes through hands that create, protect, and nurture. In that sense, the photograph is prophetic. It appeared in a digital world, drowning in doubt, yet it carried an image of stillness, a face of calm authority, a figure standing quietly beside those consecrated. To service it said, without words, you are not alone, even here. The staircase, too, remains a testimony not only to miraculous design, but to enduring grace. It stands after more than a century, untouched by decay, as if time itself cannot erode what was built in faith. Its spiral reaches upward, a frozen hymn in wood, a reminder that every act of trust leaves behind something eternal. Both signs carry the same pulse of divine irony, that God hides the infinite in the smallest acts, and that the greatest miracles are those that demand no attention. Perhaps that is why Saint Joseph's image has reappeared now, when faith is thin, when fathers are uncertain, when families fracture, when belief itself feels mechanical. He returns as the silent restorer, the invisible builder, reminding us that the sacred is not lost. It is simply waiting to be rediscovered beneath the dust of our distractions. And maybe, when all voices grow weary, when all noise fades, when we finally stop trying to prove the miraculous, he will appear again, not to be seen, but to be felt, like the scent of fresh wood in a quiet chapel, like the memory of a hand that once built something lasting. Saint Joseph does not demand belief, he builds it. And perhaps that is the final miracle, that in an age that has forgotten how to pray, a photograph and a staircase still whisper that God has never stopped working. And so the story closes where it began, in silence, but not the silence of absence, the silence of fulfillment, the kind that lingers after the last hammer strike in a workshop where something sacred has just been completed, the same silence that filled the house of Nazareth after Joseph laid down his tools and looked at the child he had raised, knowing his work was finished. There is something eternal in that quiet, something that breathes even now through the photograph on a convent wall and through the wooden spiral that still stands in Santa Fe. Both have outlived their explanations. Both have resisted decay and disbelief. They endure because they were not built for admiration. They were built for remembrance. If you stand before the staircase today, when the chapel is empty, you can almost hear the faint echo of work, the rhythm of wood being shaped by unseen hands, each step rising like a psalm, the air thick with the scent of cedar and mystery. You might not see the carpenter, but you will feel him there. And that is how faith speaks, not through proof, but through presence. And somewhere, in another part of the world, the photograph of the sisters still circulates, passed from one believer to another, each one pausing for a moment before sharing it, as if something in the image watches back not to frighten, but to console. Perhaps this is how heaven speaks now, not through thunder on mountaintops, but through small moments that ask nothing except to be noticed. Saint Joseph has always stood between the human and the divine, the bridge between the ordinary and the miraculous, between the sound of the hammer and the silence of prayer. He is the saint of what endures and the guardian of what is unseen. And if his image has truly been captured, even once, it was not to prove that he exists. It was to remind us that the sacred still walks among the living, in workshops, in families, in quiet acts of faith that no one else will ever record. When all the noise of the world fades, when belief becomes difficult, when words lose their power and only silence remains, it is then, perhaps, that he will be closest, unseen but unmistakably near. And in that stillness you may hear it, the soft sound of wood being shaped, of something invisible being built within you, a staircase rising upward, step by step, unseen, but strong enough to bear the weight of a soul returning home.